Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a special installment of our Policy Lab webinar series. Policy Lab is a research center within Children's Hospital of Philadelphia's Research Institute, and during the month of May, which is Mental Health Month, we'll be focusing several 15-minute webinars on various topics under the umbrella of behavioral health. You can see a list of the topics we'll be covering on the current slide, as well as a link to the landing page where new webinars will be posted throughout the month. We encourage you to visit our website, policylab.chop.edu, for more information and to share these webinars and other resources via Twitter, tagging us at @PolicyLabChop. My name is Laura Cavello, and I'm a Senior Communications Associate here at Policy Lab. Today I'll be talking with Dr. Alix Timko, a faculty member at Policy Lab and a clinician scientist in the Eating Disorder Assessment and Treatment Program at CHOP. Today we'll be discussing eating disorders and exploring the delicate balance in talking to teens about weight and eating. So let's dive right in. Dr. Timko, can you start off by telling me a little bit about the current state of eating disorders in the United States?
Sure. So eating disorders are often considered to be fairly rare disorders, but that's actually not the case. There are over 5 million individuals in the United States who are currently struggling with an eating disorder, and the vast majority of those are children and adolescents. There are 4 primary eating disorders that we tend to talk about: anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, and something called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, or ARFID for short. Anorexia and bulimia are usually the ones that people have heard more about, but a lot of people don't realize how common or how severe they can be. Anorexia, for example, is the 3rd most common chronic illness in adolescents, and it has the highest mortality rate of all psychiatric illnesses. Bulimia, I believe, has the number 2 position. So bulimia also has very serious medical complications and also has a fairly high mortality rate. So when it comes to the eating disorders, there are a lot of misconceptions about them. So for anorexia, for example, a lot of individuals think that in order to be diagnosed with anorexia, somebody has to be visibly underweight, and that's actually not the case. You can't tell how ill somebody is based on what their body size is. And it is very possible for someone who appears to be in a normal weight range to actually have anorexia nervosa. And so when we think about anorexia, we think about somebody who is significantly below weight in terms of their age, their sex, and also their developmental trajectory. So it's not just solely based on weight. In terms of bulimia, when a lot of people think about bulimia, they think about somebody who will eat a large amount of food and then throw up, what we call binging and purging. And what a lot of people don't realize is that individuals with bulimia can engage in a lot of other behaviors other than throwing up. So oftentimes if somebody with bulimia will eat a large amount of food in a really short period of time, they'll try to compensate for that. They can throw up, but some individuals will actually go to the gym and spend a lot of time exercising, or they'll go for a number of long runs a day. Sometimes what we see in older adolescents is maybe using diet pills or over-the-counter weight loss products to try to counteract that. So it can look very different than what people are used to seeing or hearing about eating disorders. Binge eating disorder, just so our listeners are aware, is very similar to bulimia, and that individuals with binge eating disorder typically eat a very large amount of food in a short period of time. The key is they feel really out of control while doing so. In children and adolescents, though, they don't always express that out of control feeling, so it's not immediately obvious that what we're dealing with is an eating disorder. And again, individuals with binge eating disorder aren't necessarily a particular weight. Another common misconception is that individuals with binge eating disorder tend to be of a heavier weight. That's not necessarily the case. And then finally, ARFID, our avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. This is a very diverse group of individuals with eating disorders. It can often be considered a very extreme form of picky eating. So children and adolescents with ARFID may not like to eat certain foods because they're afraid of choking, they're afraid of vomiting, they have a lot of disgust about what food might taste or feel like, or there's certain textures that they dislike. And that's not something that we often would think of immediately when someone would consider what is an eating disorder.
So what does the research tell us about the impact eating disorders can have on adolescent development?
So the research in this area is still growing, and that's actually some of the research that we do here at CHOP. Adolescence is a period of really vast growth and development, not only physical growth, which is clear, we see our kids getting taller and becoming young adults. There's also a lot of brain development. So a lot of parents can kind of remember back to when their children were toddlers and think about how quickly they learned language, and it seemed that they grew in leaps and bounds in their ability to communicate. Adolescent brain development is comparable. There's a lot that goes on during adolescence. They start learning how to critically think better. They learn to inhibit some of their impulses, and they also become much more socially oriented and integrated into their peer group a little bit more. So there's a lot of brain development that can happen. When someone has an eating disorder, they are often not getting adequate nutrition, and we don't know how a lack of adequate nutrition or being really underweight can impact that brain development.
So we know that eating is often a very social activity. In the context of eating disorders, what does that mean for adolescent social development?
Well, again, this is an area that we're really still trying to explore and understand. But if you think back to when you were a teenager, a lot of social interaction involves food, right? So you can imagine that if somebody has an eating disorder, that could potentially really limit their willingness to engage in social interactions with their friends. So they may think twice about going out for pizza after school. They may not want to go to the movies because they don't want to have to avoid getting popcorn or soda or candy. It could limit whether or not they go to particular parties. So socially, we do tend to organize our lives around food, and if somebody is restricting the type of food they eat or how much they eat, it could really impact their ability to engage with peers. In addition to that, these illnesses have a lot of really severe medical consequences, and so a lot of adolescents who have eating disorders do end up missing large periods of school. And social interactions in peer groups can change very rapidly, so not being integrated into that can also have an impact on their development.
Right. So how would you describe this tension between fighting childhood obesity and encourage healthy eating habits for kids?
So I think this question actually does a really good job of embodying the tension that exists. So when I see or hear this question, there's a few things that immediately stand out to me. One is the idea that we have to fight childhood obesity. And so what that automatically implies is that there are children whose body sizes are wrong or bad or unhealthy. And that's not necessarily true. Again, as I said in the beginning, we can't tell how healthy somebody is based on their body weight, their body shape, their body size. So fighting childhood obesity sets us up for saying that this is wrong and this is bad and this is something that needs to be eliminated. Encouraging healthy eating taps into the same kind of thing. Healthy eating assumes that there's an unhealthy eating, which means that there's good foods or bad foods, when in fact there's really no such thing as an unhealthy or a healthy food. Food is nutrition. Food is good for the body. Food gives the body energy. And so when we label some foods as good or bad, what can happen is that children who are learning this information can cut out entire food groups or entire types of foods, which for those who are at risk for developing an eating disorder could actually lead them down the path to developing an eating disorder.
Right.
And that can be really problematic. So when we frame this discussion as healthy versus unhealthy, overweight versus normal weight, we're really setting up this false dichotomy that really pathologizes normal behavior and normal body weight range. And that, again, can lead to some really significant problems when we talk about the development of eating disorders.
So keeping all that in mind, what kinds of conversations can parents have with teens about eating and weight?
I think it's important for parents to remember and to really feel empowered that they are an incredible example for their children. And so parents can really lead the way in teaching their children body acceptance, teaching them that all food is good food and that there are no such things as bad food or unhealthy food, by really using that language in their everyday life. So when parents avoid engaging in body shaming or fat shaming language, when parents talk about food as being fun, and when they encourage flexibility in eating in their kids, they're really setting a very good example. And that example can be really powerful, particularly because teenagers don't always like to listen to their parents. They do see how their parents behave, and they do incorporate the language that their parents use. Parents can also feel really empowered to talk to their providers about this. So if parents observe or witness providers potentially using body shaming language or expressing concern about a child's weight, parents can step in and share with the provider their thoughts about using that type of potentially harmful language with children. Likewise, parents can reach out to schools. So a lot of schools will have health classes where children are taught proper nutrition. And again, some things are labeled as bad foods or good foods. So parents can have really honest discussions, not only with the school, but also with their children about what they're learning in school, and really try to teach them a more flexible approach to thinking about these things. And for parents who live in school districts where the schools actually require adolescents or middle schoolers to be weighed and send home a weight report card, parents can call the school and opt out of that happening for their child and provide a rationale for that. And so parents can be really empowered to speak up for their children and to encourage a more open and flexible environment around these topics in their home and school environments.
Dr. Timko, thank you so much for talking through this topic with me today. For those listening in, if you'd like to access additional webinars in the series, please visit policylab.chop.edu. Thank you for joining us.